Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate being recognized and appreciate the testimony of the witnesses. I'll say that I was of your opinion back in the 90s, and I took the initiative to go on a trip down to Cuba. I was with a people-to-people mission, entirely legal and supported, of course. And I went down there because I intended to, with personal experience, ratify my opinion that we should open up trade with Cuba. And there's nothing like going somewhere to learn the things that support your position that gives a person the authority and the credibility then to come back and advocate for such a position. And I can't think of another time in my life that I went somewhere actually for that reason, or certainly I had not had an experience that turned me 180 degrees like the time I spent in Cuba. If I had stayed with the people-to-people mission, we spent our days being handled by Castro's minders, going from place to place, listening to people in gray smocks, answer questions that were translated from English into Spanish that were not the questions that we were asking, and the answers that they were giving were not the answers to the questions that were being asked. It took me a little while to figure that out, and myself and then State Senator David Miller went off on our own. And we ended up picking up an individual. He actually approached us down along Havana Harbor, and he became our guide for 3 days. And we went all over that island in 3 days, and he was a communist, a Marxist, and he was proud of Cuba, and he's a Cuban historian. But throughout those long days, I learned some things in spite of his intent to give us a 3-day commercial. And two of those things stood out for me that I can't get past. One of them is that when Castro nationalized the real property in Cuba, which I think was 1963, 25% of that real property, the deeds to that property were in the hands of Americans. The Americans are the only ones that have not been compensated for that real estate. They hold their deeds today. And if there were to be investment from Americans into Cuba, having witnessed the Muriel boat lift, I can't imagine Castro doing anything except selling that real property that belongs to Americans back to other Americans to pit them against each other. That would be one point. Another point that was a surprise to me was to learn that at that time the exchange rate of the peso to the dollar was 21 to 1. And one would think that Americans trading in Cuba, tourists going to Cuba, would give the Cubans an opportunity to make some money off of that endeavor. So maybe it lifts them up economically and exchanges a little the spirit of free enterprise. But what really happens is, it's changed a little bit now, but the effect is the same, is that Cubans could, at that time, earn American dollars, and they could hold them, but they couldn't spend them unless they went to a dollar store where an American dollar was worth 1 peso, not 21. Castro was picking up the 20 peso vigorish out of the 21 pesos to the dollar, and that was going and still goes into his treasury and into his coffers to fund the administration, to fund his brutal communist dictatorship. Now, those are just 2 points that I couldn't get past. I couldn't find a way to rationalize that, even though I went down there to be able to ratify an opinion to opening up trade to Cuba. So where I sit today is that we have invested nearly we have a full half a century into waiting out the biological solution in Cuba. And I can't imagine we can wait very much longer, but I am more patient than the witnesses before us here. I'm willing to wait out this biological solution, and because we've invested so much in it, and I would say that Castro has been an exporter of his Marxist ideology in the Western Hemisphere, and that changes the argument on whether we allow trade into China or into Iran. And I understand the philosophy that has been voiced here, and I would only draw that distinction. It is our back door. He's exported his brand of Marxism. He's been influential not just in the Western Hemisphere, in places like Angola as well. And if I am not opposed to getting food to Cubans, and I would hope that if we do something here, we can limit our endeavor to getting food to Cubans rather than inadvertently propping up a communist regime that, when that day comes of the biological solution, if we don't have a plan in place, if we don't have a way to encourage the Cubans any more than we've encouraged the Iranians when they took to the streets, then those 11 million Cubans down there that have been now cursed with a half a century of living under the slavery of the communist dictator Castro may well see another half of a century. So that is how I look at this, and I hope we can find a solution that doesn't play into the hands of Castro. And I'm gonna just pass up my chance to ask a question, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being recognized, and I appreciate the witnesses as they know.
Thank you, gentlemen. Would the gentleman answer a question? So are you in favor of quitting selling Boeing aircraft to China and other things that we're doing, which are propping up that communist regime?
Let's figure out how to work on that endeavor as well, Mr. Chairman, because it does light up my attention.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King.
So, Mr. Chairman, I really didn't anticipate to have Mr. Moran inspire me quite so much, but the point that I made earlier is about the liberty of the Cuban people, and I think that's something that we should take into consideration. We are the vanguard of liberty for the world, and it is part of what remains of the Monroe Doctrine. It's our global position that has put our troops in harm's way on every continent that I can think of. But I'd take you back to these circumstances. There's a limit to what the Cubans can buy. In fact, the Cubans are limited. They can't buy anything from you. All business is conducted by Alimport, which is Castro's organization. He decides who gets the proceeds and who does not. He's able to distribute the foodstuffs to the people that support him, and he's able to keep it away from the people that do not support him. He does use it as a tool. And I'm just not hearing this in the dialogue on how Castro would be able to use some of this as a tool. But here's some things. I just asked him to put together for me some of the items that are on the ration card. And I haven't heard the dialogue either about the rationing in Cuba. And this is updated exactly today. Here's the ration. If you're between 0 and 7 years old or a pregnant woman, which I don't know any other version that is pregnant, you can purchase it's kind of the farming background, you know, a liter of milk every day and meat when available. The ration, and additionally, per person per month, your ration is 5 pounds of rice, 4 pounds of sugar, 1 to 2 bags of salt, whatever size they are, 1 tube of toothpaste for up to 4 persons in a household, 8 ounces of grains, other types of grains apparently than rice, a 1/4 pound of cooking oil per person per month, a half a bar of soap per person per month, 2 bags of coffee per person per month, 4 eggs per person per month. A couple of omelets a month would be the ration on the eggs. And I think we need to think of this within the context of what it's like in a country that is so politically manipulated that people are scared to death to even get to know their neighbor. And having food used as a tool against them for political purposes. And I pose this question this way, and I think to each of you, and maybe I can articulate it enough that it can allow you to provide each an answer. But I know that we've talked about the economics of this, and my life has been wrapped up in the economics of ag commodities and the necessity for us to have good markets. It's everywhere around me. I look from my house, and I'll either see corn or soybeans, depending on the rotation. And I live that. I live that in the middle of my life for all these years that I've been blessed with. But this discussion that we've had is about the economic impact on our ag producers, and that's the only focus that I have heard. And I'm not charging that you have a responsibility beyond that, but I would just ask the question, starting with Mr. Wagner, has a discussion about the promotion of this liberty that Mr. Moran so eloquently talks about, but promoting it to the Cuban people, and has that been also part of the discussion as you look at your policy, or have these policies by your organization and each of you been confined to the economic question solely, as your testimony apparently has been?
No, we've talked about the moral side of this as well, and something came to mind last night. How can you export freedom when there's such a shortage of it in this country? If we don't have the freedom to travel there and carry on commerce there, I don't know how we're going to export and change those people's way of life.
But Mr. Wagner, though, I mean, is it then this rationale, and it doesn't have to be the position of your organization, but is it the rationale that Americans traveling to and trading with Cubans does export freedom and liberty to them because it's contagious? That's what I believed when I went there, but I no longer believe that. But is that close to the position that's being discussed?
I think we have some evidence of that in history in the USSR. and in China to some degree, and in Vietnam. That we are open trading partners with Vietnam now. We just finished a war with them, 30 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. McReynolds?
I just go back to my experiences there and realize it wasn't a long period of time. But the Cuban people were very eager to communicate with us and just eager to just little things, know a little bit more about the United States, about America, about schools, universities. I was overwhelmed with their eagerness to have a better understanding of our life and what we did in our lifestyles, in our families. And so, I think when you have that free travel opportunity, you're opening a whole new world up to people that have that opportunity. And to restrict U.S., I don't see the rationale there at all. And we have the opportunity to go to other places in the world. Why would we be restricted there? But I think it opens up a whole new world to Cuban people. I think even our interaction with our guide and with the people that we associated with, which was a cross-section of individuals, I got the impression that they benefited for us being there. I guess I would like to think that, but I certainly did.
I learned to love the people, and to that sentiment I would agree that the net result, of course, we do not. But I'd ask, Mr. Chairman, if I could allow the witnesses on down the line to respond to the similar question with the time we have. Mr. Wilson, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'd say, our initial reason is economic, because we do see it will benefit U.S. dairy farmers by being able to adequately compete with dairy farmers from other parts of the world. However, along those lines, you can't avoid getting into the other aspects of this argument. And I think, in one sense, you'd say, okay, we've been doing this for my whole lifetime, essentially. And
Castro's whole life
really hasn't. We really haven't made any progress there. And we do. I guess you look back from 100,000 feet in the world, and you see how communication, partly through the internet, but communication has changed the world just in the last few years, really. And it's changed a lot of countries and the way they treat their people, I think, in the last few years. And so perhaps allowing U.S. citizens to the freedom of going to Cuba, whether it be tourists or whether it be on business or whatever, there has to be some interaction with the common people in those approaches.
You recognize
why wouldn't that help?
You recognize that it enriches the regime. Every dollar spent down there, a large share of it goes into the hands of Castro.
We're not going to change that overnight, but we have to take this in steps, and we would believe that it's a positive step to allow people from the United States to go there. I mean, how are they any different than China? We've said that before here.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, our policy is economic as well, and I am not reinventing the wheel here. We talked with our leadership about these issues, and we know what you're talking about. But we do look at China and say, we're sending food to China right now, and that's an oppressing nation, and so that's how we deal with the situation on the Corn Board.
Thank you, Mr. Fritz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. King. I think this answer is perhaps in two parts. The American Soybean Association has, of course, had a long history of supporting free and open trade and imposing restrictions. With that said, I've promoted U.S. soybeans in many countries of the world, serving on the ASA Trade Policy International Affairs Committee. And what you learn when you travel is you learn the cultures of the country. You learn to understand the people. You learn to tolerate other cultures, and you appreciate them for what they are. Specifically, what I see happening in Cuba is that when we have visitors, any visitors, American visitors or visitors from other parts of the world, in Cuba, I think, in effect, we are holding the government accountable because we have eyes on the ground. We have people seeing what's going on. We have the ability to bring back those stories of discrimination and poor respect for human rights. But specifically to this bill, we exported 496,000 metric tons of soybean meal and soybean oil to Cuba. That is a lot of food. That's a lot of protein for a lot of people, not just members of the regime. So in regards to this bill, I see this bill as a way of doing business and doing business better than what we have before. But what is it all about? It's all about feeding hungry people.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank all the witnesses, and I want to just put this into the record that one of my goals and one of my very high goals and dreams in life is to swim ashore at the Bay of Pigs and walk out onto a free Cuba. And I hope we can see that day. All of us live to see that day. Thank you very much.
Mr. King, I take it from your comments that you must have supported the Russian grain embargo.
I think what I saw happen...
Maybe you're not old enough to remember that.
I am a very youthful individual, Mr. Chairman. But what I saw happen with the Russians, and no, I didn't.
No, I mean, the problem is the people are going to get this stuff someplace. Just us cutting it off is all we're doing is hurting ourselves. We're not, whether they buy it from the U.S. or buy it from Vietnam or wherever they buy it, isn't going to do a damn thing about the problems we're talking about. And, we've got groups here that maybe I don't always agree with, the Human Rights Watch and so forth, that have exactly the opposite position that you do, that they say that this bill will help these human rights problems. So, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face here. I mean, this is crazy. And we're going to disagree on that, but this has gone on long enough. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you for that endorsement of my sanity, Mr. Chairman, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
I think the chairman has many words of wisdom.